Once we finish, typically 11:15, we open it up for questions. We've given you some handouts there, which is a place to jot down questions that you have, so that when we do open it up for questions, you'll have that in front of me. We do have a no selling policy, so all of these guys are donating their time and energy today and have done some preliminary work for today. They have brought information that will be available to you to pick up after the seminar, but none of us are here to push our services or organizations. But feel free to ask any questions and speak with them directly afterwards. We have one panelist today, Mr. Steve. You want to raise your hand, Steve? Okay. He does. He's stepping in for somebody else, one of his coworkers that has a first grandchild being born today. So he's stepping in last minute. He will have to leave at about 11 or so. So I guess I'm saying that if you have questions for him, that we're going to try to get him knocked out kind of first, because he's got limited availability. So we have evaluation sheets for you. That's the orange goldenrod sheet there that we do so appreciate you filling that out and giving it back to us. We like to hear your feedback. We like to hear ideas of future topics, and we do read all of them. If we need to get back to you with anything, we will do so. So we're going to get started. Those that are regular attendees, you'll notice, so it's a smaller group today than what we normally have. And in talking with our panelists here, they said, you know what, this is a good, this is a good group for the topic, because people don't want to talk about this, and that's why we're doing, this is a topic that we're doing, is different things that are involved. So it's inevitable, and so our topic today is living, dying, and leaving a legacy. We believe knowledge is power, and that we want to be in control of things. So there seems to be two main goals that people are faced with when we get older. One, maintaining control of our lives, and two, leaving a legacy. We do all agree with those being general things that we're all dealing with? Okay, so we find that by being more educated and planning and being proactive, that you can breathe easier, and you're able to enjoy the time that you still have ahead of you, or ahead of us. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get our panelists up here. Guys, if you all want to come up, take a seat. We do have two other microphones that we can share.
I'm good. I'm pretty loud. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well. Okay. Thank you. So let's start out by why doesn't everybody introduce themselves, tell us who you are, what you do, and why you're here today.
Can everybody hear me without a microphone? Everybody hear me okay?
You can pass that over too. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Jessica Brinkman. I am a funeral director with Bowie Funeral Home. So I'm here today just to see what questions I can help answer for you all. I know the topic of funeral planning is not a fun one. So people often ask me that, how do you do your job? It's not an easy job. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it is, but it's very rewarding. I get to help somebody on one of the worst days of their lives make it a little simpler if I can. So I am just here to be a resource and answer questions that may be a little morbid, but feel free to ask anything that you think would bring you some peace of mind and that you want answered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Hi, my name is Sarah Rumker. I'm Family Service Director at Bowie Funeral Home in St. Charles Memorial Gardens. So So in terms of this conversation, I think that my expertise in question asking and answering would definitely be pre-arranged funeral service and cemetery property. So as we move forward, if you guys have any questions about that, I like to consider myself a pretty good sounding board about that, and I'm happy to provide you guys some hopefully useful insights. Oh, she has a microphone.
Hi. Can you guys hear me?
You do need my microphone. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Allison Dean. I am a social worker, a hospice social worker. I work for Lutheran Senior Services, hospice care. I've been working for LSS for over 2.5 years and have been working as a hospice social worker for 3.5 years. How I describe my job is providing a lot of support, education, and then resources to our hospice patients and families. So I have, these sorts of meetings, normally with family groups, so smaller groups than here today, but I'm happy to be here and happy to answer any questions that you all might have regarding end of life and hospice care specifically, but happy to be here.
Thanks, Allison. Ryan?
Good morning. How's everybody doing? I'm Ryan Kerner. I'm President and General Counsel for Freedom Title. I'm a real estate and trust and estate planning attorney. So I'm a nice guy, so you guys don't have to hate the attorney right off the bat. I'm happy to be here today to help out and answer any questions you guys may have about your estate planning. Nice to meet you all.
Good morning. My name is Steve Miskovic. I am the owner of Care Choice Care Management, but I'm a social worker. Been a social worker for, 25 plus years. I've pretty much seen it all, done it all, worked with the state of Missouri, several nonprofits. So any kind of question really, regarding resources, services, programs, benefits like Medicaid, I can give you some good general answers. So just looking to help.
Awesome, thanks guys. So we're going to talk about myths and allow our panelists an opportunity to elaborate on them as we go, and thereby simplifying the truths. So let's get started. So Sarah, myth: dying is free and easy. We all want to fantasize we'll die in our sleep and everything will just take care of ourselves. So can you speak to that?
Let's bust that myth now. I'm just joking. Dying is a part of life, and we all know that it's coming there at some point. And I know it's not the most pleasant. It's probably a fairly difficult issue for all of us to grapple with, but the long and short of it is everybody will need a funeral home at some point in time. So I think that the sooner that we become comfortable with that concept and kind of begin to look towards planning that concept, I think we're going to make it a lot easier on our families. But to your end, I would say free and easy are two words I would probably not use to describe that process.
Okay, so the truth, when people avoid pre-planning, others are left with dealing with the remaining details.
That's exactly right. So what we find is that when people enter into that phase of life without a plan, what we are doing is we're leaving our loved ones overwhelmed and underprepared at the time of making decisions. So as they walk in to make those decisions, they don't really have the confidence of knowing that that's exactly what you would have wanted. There's a lot of heavy lifting on their end. So to that point, that's part of the reason why we promote so hard having some type of pre-arrangement in place so that we can make those decisions on behalf of our loved ones and allow them just to have a nice plan to execute at the time of, instead of constructing that plan as the plane's taking off.
Okay. Steve, myth: getting older means becoming less useful.
No, that is not true at all. That is definitely a myth. There is research out there that about 25% of the workforce is over 65 years old. So that's a huge chunk of our gross national profit and everything, and the earned income that comes into this world, plus the tax base. So, and then there's lots of volunteerism. My aunt, who's in her mid-60s, she does ready readers for young kids. She drives down to South City, South County, and she works at a couple schools. my mom in her mid-70s. She was volunteering for the Humane Society. So most people are still active. I think, like anything, the folks that can't, for whatever reason, they, maybe get a little more attention, which is what they need. But for the most part, people stay fairly active into their 80s.
So, truth, having a purpose, often by helping someone else, provides lifelong meaning and sense of usefulness.
Absolutely right. I mean, that's all we need. And when I worked for the Alzheimer's Association, one of the things that we would often talk about with somebody with a dementia, even regardless of where they were in their lifespan or in their disease process, they were always looking for a purpose. And so when we talk to family caregivers, it's like, what can they do? Can they fold a towel? And I know it, so I'm just giving you an example that regardless of where we are in our life, meaning and purpose is there. Sometimes we got to figure it out for the other person, but that is something that we all crave and need.
Great, thank you, Steve. Allison, enrolling in hospice means giving up on living and hastens death.
That is not true. Hospice care, rather, is a shift in what's known as a plan of care. So instead of more of a curative approach to care, like we're used to in the traditional medical model, hospice care, the focus is on comfort and quality of life. So when somebody comes onto hospice care, they are no longer wishing to pursue curative measures. They are wanting essentially nature to take its course. Maybe there are no other curative treatments available, or maybe there are, and the particular patient has decided, I don't want to pursue curative measures. I want to just remain comfortable for however long that I have. Hospice care, we do not hasten death. We're just along for the natural decline that a patient has, and to ensure that their symptoms are managed.
And I know years ago I always thought this, I don't know if others think this, but that hospice was just for people who were diagnosed with cancer, and that's not accurate.
No, we certainly have patients on service with all sorts of diagnoses. There's different qualification criteria dependent on the diagnosis. In general terms, to qualify for hospice, one has to have a prognosis of 6 months or less determined by a physician. I can speak to my caseload. I have patients on for Alzheimer's disease. I have patients on for various cancers. I have patients on for Parkinson's. Sometimes people come on to service and it's because they've had a significant weight loss and they're no longer eating or drinking, or their intake has decreased to the point that, if this continues, we're looking at a prognosis of 6 months or less. So there's various things that can qualify someone to receive hospice.
Okay, thank you. And I know I've heard a lot of people that actually graduate from hospice, meaning they're out of hospice because things have turned around and they're thriving again. So, it's for that too. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, in a nutshell, the truth would be hospice is a shift in the plan of care for the patient from a curative approach to a palliative approach to ensure the patient is comfortable. Okay. Ryan, myth. Life insurance in my estate will take care of my funeral expenses.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about life insurance, which it's a great product to help take care of your heirs or your loved ones. However, it's not instantaneous, right? Once you pass, it's going to take your family some time to actually collect on that money, right? The funeral expenses are going to take place pretty shortly thereafter, right? So some homework that I'd like to have you all do is ask your insurance policy carriers if your policy is assignable. And that means it needs to be assignable to the funeral home so they can use that policy to get paid for their services. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the real truth behind if a life insurance policy can cover the funeral cost.
Okay, so truth, if your policy is assignable, it may take care of funeral expenses, but without proper pre-planning, money from an estate may not be available for longer periods of time.
And I'll also add in there with life insurance, it's a good idea to check on your beneficiaries because life circumstances change, people pass away, families get disagreements, whatever it may be, but check every so often, update your beneficiaries on your life insurance policy just to make sure when the time does come, the money goes exactly to who you want it to go to.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback off that
Sure.
if I can,
Yep.
just for a second on the funeral side. Sorry. Everything he mentioned is 100% accurate, and following up with your beneficiaries is even more important. For how the insurance assignment works in the funeral home is that we will need the policy number, so that way we can verify the policy is active and will cover the funeral expenses. But then we will also need the beneficiary to sign the assignment form, and they also will have to sign the claim form. So it's important that your beneficiaries are up to date. They are aware of what your funeral wants and wishes are, and that they are willing to sign the assignment form to have those funds go to the funeral. Because there are instances where the beneficiary of a policy may not be the highest next of kin who's making the funeral arrangements. So we just want everybody to be on the same page that the life insurance policy will be used to cover the funeral expenses if that's the plan.
I've got to add on to that as well. So I'm going to take a little bit different spin. When it comes to kind of getting your policy assigned to a funeral home, something to also keep in mind is if you're ever in a position where you need to apply for Medicaid and there's a cash value, or what they call a cash surrender value on your life insurance policy, that cash surrender value is the asset that the state would count. If you basically give the policy to the funeral home to cover those expenses, now you've reassigned ownership and that policy is no longer counted as an asset for applying for Medicaid. So I don't want to get way deep in the weeds on the Medicaid stuff, but it's a nice tool because that's what people are often using their life insurance for, is to pay for funeral expenses. And this is a nice way to not lose it, because if your policy, let's say, is worth $20,000, but your cash value is 10, if you cash it in, you lose $10,000. If you can reassign it to the funeral home, you get to keep the whole dollar amount, and you no longer own it, but the funeral home will use it for those expenses.
Ryan, anything to add on that?
I think that covers it.
Okay, awesome.
One
Okay.
last thing, please.
Sure.
Make sure you know your policy number. We have a lot of people that come in, they're like, well, I think Dad had a life insurance policy for working it back. Okay, that's very helpful baseline knowledge, but without like policy information and things like that, it's hard for us to access. So I would say at least have your policy information where your kids can access it.
Okay. All right.
What if your policy is worth more than your funeral expenses? What happens to the excess money?
It goes to the beneficiaries.
It gets
You
re-
assign the funeral amount to the funeral home, and then as a beneficiary, the rest would go to you.
So let's say like just base numbers, like let's say that you didn't have a pre-arrangement and you're paying at the time of need at Bowie. We take a 3% fee to process that, just because there's fees in processing that life insurance policy. But let's say that you have a $100,000 policy and you have a $15,000 funeral, we're going to charge the $15,000 plus the 3% fee to that life insurance policy, and then your beneficiaries will receive a check for the balance. So they're basically paying a 3% convenience fee to have the cost of that funeral deducted from that life insurance policy, and to have us process it before a death certificate is issued.
Is that where pre-planning comes in? Because we're part of a plan to where we've already paid for our building. So if we assign it to them, we still have a locked-in value that goes to the funeral
So
fund.
if you could, hold your questions till the end because some of these are going to be answered already. But please, if it doesn't get answered through this, we're going to open it up for questions at the end here. So thank you so much. Jessica, myth. I can donate my body to science and my family won't have to worry about anything.
So not entirely true. Donating your body to science, typically at SLU or WashU or the big schools, it's not always guaranteed. First and foremost, at SLU and WashU, you have to be accepted ahead of time. So it's something that you have to apply for and be accepted into their program. There's always the chance that at the time of your passing, they could still reject you. They have very strict guidelines that you have to meet within. So there's still the possibility that even if you've been pre-accepted, that they could reject you. Now, there are other donation programs in the area, such as National Body Donation or Logan Chiropractic. Those are both programs where you don't have to be accepted ahead of time, but again, they also have very strict guidelines. So there's that aspect. There's also the aspect that just because you're donating your body to science doesn't mean that your family won't want to celebrate your life and honor your legacy. So they still may want to have services, whether that is a celebration of life or a memorial service. However, they want to celebrate your life and make sure that they're honoring the time that you spent here with them. And then last but not least, it's often most of the myth that once you're accepted into a program, that everything's taken care of. And what a lot of people don't realize is that with WashU and SLU, the transportation is not included in that aspect. So they'll need to, we don't encourage just putting them in the back of the truck, it's not encouraged.
But not legal.
Right. So you will still need the funeral home involvement to receive you into our care from the place of passing. That way we can communicate with the school of your choice to make sure that you've been accepted into their program, and then we'll take you to their donation program. But you're also going to need the funeral home's help to generate the death certificate, along with notifying Social Security as well. So it's those pieces of the puzzle that also need to be planned for in addition to being accepted to the school.
Okay, so truth would be anatomical donation is not always guaranteed, and families may still want to have a celebration of life or a funeral service. Okay. Steve and Ryan, I don't have a legacy to leave. Speak towards that.
Okay, well, it all depends on how you define legacy. I think, there are some people that think legacy is just money. It's what you can leave monetarily. I look at it kind of more broadly. I used to teach a class at WashU with a colleague in the School of Social Work, and he would always tell a story at the end of the semester, and I'll use his story, that at his dad's funeral, his dad worked at the Post or the Globe, I can't remember, down in the printing press. Anyway, he had several guys come in, and my friend had never met these people, but they worked with his dad. And they told stories about how his dad did something, just a one-off kind of thing, that he protected somebody that was getting hassled at work, or something came up that he gave him a couple of bucks to get him through to the next paycheck, whatever those stories were. He said he didn't know anything about that. He didn't know those stories. But that was a legacy that he found out later about, that what kind gestures his dad did. So I think that, when we look at legacy, I think we have to step back and say, is it money, is it property, what are we doing to show other people that we were good folks, right? We're teaching our kids, we're teaching other people. So I look at it from that social work lens a little bit different. But on the other side of this, it is laying out your estate plan, so you don't leave things to end up in probate where the state's going to get half and it's going to sit there for a year. You got to have your beneficiaries. You got to put those things in place. Put your homes in a trust. Put your property, your bank accounts, things like that, or at least title them in certain ways. And I'm not an attorney, and I'll let him speak to some of that. But laying out those things, because even if there's no money to give somebody, if you don't have your things deeded and titled and with the right beneficiaries, then you leave your family holding the bag, and they've got a lot of work to do on the back end of things. And I know most people say, I don't want to be a burden to my kids. I've heard that time and time again. And then the flip side of that is, okay, here's the things you can do that will unburden your kids, and then we'll see what goes on from there.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything more individualistic than what you want your legacy to be, right? And as an attorney, I deal in black and white, right? So it's like Steve said, there's some things you can put in place to help your family with the time constraints of death and with the financial constraints with death. And if there's one goal I want you all to try to focus on as you leave here, is how can I avoid probate? Because attorneys are expensive and we take a long time, right? So if you can avoid probate by putting a beneficiary deed on your house, that's probably the single most inexpensive and easy method to take care of your biggest asset that you own. Your trust, if you have a trust, actually titling things in the trust, that makes life extremely easy. So those are two big things to help keep stuff out of probate, because the less attorneys that you have involved, the better off you will be.
I want to add one thing about that too. So when you're thinking about this, you can set up trusts as you want them, right? And these are your decisions to lay things out. Like when we set up our trust, my son's 19 and our daughter's 23. When we set them up, if we were to both die, my son saw it and he goes, Dad, why does Madison get it at 26, but I got to be 30? I said, are you really asking me that, son? I said, look at all the, I can go through the litany of things that you've cost me, more than your sister ever did. I said, and he goes, all right, Dad, that's a fair point. I'm like, all right, there you go. So you can lay things out. Nothing has to be the same for everybody. Things can be done in a way that is suitable to you and not pressured from other family, right? And so just remember, these are your decisions and they're very, very important. And just, having those things titled just makes things so much better. And this goes for your cars too. Get a title on death. So when you go to the DMV, if you're the only person on it, generally they ask you. But little things like that can just make life a lot easier.
Yep, thank you.
Stuff with titles. Anything that you have that has a title to it. So houses, cars, boats, get those things taken care of, because those are the biggest assets and cause the biggest headaches after death. Then check on your bank accounts. Make sure you have beneficiaries or second signers on your bank accounts. And then also with your retirement accounts, make sure your beneficiaries are lined up. Okay.
Great, thank you. Everyone leaves a legacy. Some are just more purposeful about it than others. And if I could be honest for a moment, this is one of the reasons why I started doing these educational seminars. So I started thinking about my life and what I would want people to say about me when I pass. And this is one of the things I can do to help people, to educate and empower you. So I hope that will be part of my legacy. Okay, excuse me, Ryan, myth. My power of attorney gives my family permission to take care of my funeral arrangements.
Okay, so this is a good one. By show of hands, who has a power of attorney set up already? Right? So yeah.
Your family.
Excellent first step, right? And so, but there's two different documents I want you guys to think about, because there's a lot of confusion out there. A power of attorney helps your family assign somebody to take care of your financial affairs while you're still living. Does that make sense? When you pass away, that power of attorney, a bank won't accept it. It's not going to work for taking care of your financial affairs. Once you pass, the duties assigned on the power of attorney, they go away, right? So it's an active document while you're still living. There's a second document, and it's got several different names, a healthcare power of attorney, a healthcare directive, durable healthcare directive. That is something that gives your healthcare takers directive on how you want to be handled when you can't make your own decisions, right? We're all at the age, we remember the Terry Schiavo case, right? Where Terry Schiavo sat essentially in a vegetative state because there wasn't a power of attorney giving healthcare directives, for lack of a better word, to pull the plug, right? So none of us, chances are none of us want that same type of end-of-life experience. So there is specific language in the healthcare directive that funeral homes, that healthcare takers can use to give direction to what you want done with your body after the fact. So make sure you have those two documents. They're two distinctive documents. They both will help your family make decisions and help take care of your financial affairs. So it's a power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney. Sound good?
Yeah, awesome. Different
documents.
Different documents. And yeah, so truth is your power of attorney expires when you do.
Correct.
The verbiage that he is speaking of in your healthcare power of attorney is usually one of three things. It's the rights of disposition, the rights to do with my body after my death, or the rights of sepulcher.
Of what?
Sepulcher.
Okay.
And so that is usually the verbiage that is used, and funeral homes are looking for specifically when we ask you to bring in a copy of your power of attorney. If your power of attorney does not have that, I would look over it because, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, it usually can be amended to add in that wording.
Or just a new one drawn
Or a
up.
new one.
That's just as easy.
Never hurts just to look over it ahead of time just to make sure it has that wording if you have a power of attorney in place that you want a specific person making your funeral arrangements.
So, like I said earlier, we still on? Yeah. Like I said earlier, if in looking at your insurance policies, I tell my clients every 5 years is a good benchmark to try and look at your estate plan. That goes with your wills, that goes with your trust, that goes with your power of attorneys also. Those people change over time, and it's always a good idea to revisit that, all your estate planning documents, including your power of attorney and your durable healthcare power of attorney.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Steve, myth. If I don't have family or friends to name as a durable power of attorney, the court will appoint a great guardian and conservator.
Not really. So this is a long answer maybe. So if you don't have anyone to name, there are some organizations out there are some attorneys that will do this. There is a fee generally if you're hiring somebody to basically be your power of attorney. But there is one organization out there called Guardian Assist right now. They're a nonprofit doing this work. They just started up a couple of years ago. So very new. And then there are, again, some attorneys, and it does take a little bit of looking to find somebody to be able to do that. Regarding the court taking over, so there's two words, and they get used interchangeably, but there's capacity and there's, capacity is something that the doctor can say, or you can have a psychologist or someone say, well, this person doesn't have the capacity to make decisions. That doesn't mean you're incompetent. Competency is done by the court, and that's generally when you're talking about guardianship. And so guardianship is if a person, let's say they don't have a power of attorney, but at this point they're no longer capable of making a decision because they don't have the cognitive abilities to understand what they're signing. So then someone may have to hire an attorney to petition the court to become somebody's legal guardian. If there is nobody, no family member or friend or someone to do that, then every county in Missouri has a public administrator. One of the roles of that office is to become a guardian and conservator for individuals in that particular county, although you can shift counties, but that's a different story. But in order to do that, it's not just going to the courthouse, filing a document. You got to have the doctor's documentation stating that this person is no longer capable of ever making a decision, and the chances of recovering are 0. So there's ways to do it. It's very difficult. That's why if you haven't done your documents now, and you know that you have family that can be that agent, that power of attorney for you, get them done now. It gets much more sticky later on, especially if you can't make a decision. Even if you have family, but now you've reached a point where you can't say, I want such and such to be my power of attorney, then that might leave your loved one the only option of hiring an attorney to file guardianship.
Ryan, anything you want to add?
Don't go that route. Take care of this now. Attorneys are expensive. They'll eat away at your legacy, your financial aspects of your legacy. Find someone or a company to stand in your shoes to make decisions, good decisions for you that you want done. And if there's another piece of homework, if you don't have that in place now, get it done. It'll make life 100 times easier for your family.
Okay, so truth, if there is no one and the person needs a guardian, then the court will assign a public administrator to serve as guardian and conservator. But this process can take several months.
Accurate.
Okay, and I don't know if you know, how you guys feel about the government, but I really don't want somebody assigned from the government being able to make decisions for me.
So I'll say this too, if a public administrator becomes a person's guardian, generally, this isn't 100%, but generally that person is placed in some type of a long-term care facility, some nursing home. And the public administrator has done their job by making sure that person is in a protected environment. Not necessarily, might not be the best place, but it's a place. And so just know that they have lots of people on their list that they're guardians and or conservators for, and so they make decisions based on their ability. So they're like, well, if this place can take 6 of the folks, that's where they're going to go. And they don't necessarily go and visit or anything like that. So just know it's a very impersonal, low-touch situation.
Thank you. Allison, myth, hospice is just about treating the dying person.
No, that is certainly a myth. Hospice is patient and family-centered care. I would say our team sometimes is actually providing more support to the family than the patient. Not all the time, but sometimes, depending on a patient's state, sometimes we're providing even more support to their family. We obviously know that death impacts not just the dying person, but their whole family system. So our services are catered to that patient to ensure they're comfortable, but also to their family to ensure that they have support in the grieving process, support with logistical matters like funeral planning, emotional, how I describe hospice is it's holistic care. So, we want physical comfort, obviously, for the patient, but we also want emotional and spiritual comfort to the patient and their entire family system.
Okay, thank you. So, truth, hospice is patient and family-centered care and provides bereavement support for up to 13 months following the death of the patient.
I'll touch on that. I didn't mention that. So that is an amazing service that we offer as part of hospice services. Pretty much all hospices have a bereavement coordinator on staff, and this person is designed to provide grief support to our families for up to 13 months following the passing of the patient. So that service is available to anyone in the family that would like that extra grief support.
Okay, thank you. Jessica, myth. My family knows I want the cheapest funeral available, so that's exactly what they will do.
That's not true. So first and foremost, the value of funerals is different to everybody. And I'm not just talking about monetary. The value of having a visitation with an open casket versus just having a loved one cremated with a memorial service, that serves different values when it comes to the grieving process and the healing process. And it means different things to each individual person. I tell people all the time, what I've learned most about working in this industry is everything regarding funerals is pure preference. It's what is best for you and your healing process and how you cope. And so you may know that mom was a very frugal person. But if you have, especially if you have multiple children sitting around a table making arrangements for mom, they all may have a different idea of what the cheapest means. And if you're trying to appease many different people while also trying to honor the wishes of your loved one who did not make their arrangements ahead of time and just left you with a simple, I want the cheapest, you more than likely will end up overspending because you're trying to please different people while trying to honor that wish at the same time. So this is again why we encourage, at the very least, having those hard but open conversations regarding what your specific wants and wishes are. Do you want to be cremated? Do you want to be buried? Do you want a service? Do you want no services? Because nobody likes to second guess themselves, much less when you're in a very emotional state. Nobody around that arrangement table is making rational decisions. And so in the end, overspending is usually what happens. And it's unfortunate because there could have been a very direct plan put in place.
Okay, so the truth, families often find themselves in a conflicting decision-making process because they're trying to abide what they think the loved one would have wanted, and they end up overspending. Okay, great. Sarah kind of touched on this a little bit, so it might be redundant. Myth, there's no need to spend the money on a visitation and funeral service after I'm gone.
I think that that's a huge myth. I think a lot of people that come in and talk to me, and like I said, my role is to sit down with families and prearrange services, and many of them believe that what they're doing is making things easier on their children by just saying statements such as, just cremate me and be done with it. And I think that what they're thinking is, we're just going to save them this, this trouble of having a service for me. I'm going to spare them that. When what we have found is that actually the opposite is to be true. What you're doing is you're denying your family that platform to receive the support that they need in the days and weeks after they've lost you. And so when we kind of cut out that ceremony of funeral service, what you're doing is kind of denying your family that opportunity to receive support being in the grieving process. While you may think that you're saving them the problem, they look at it differently. I know I would never let my mom pass away and then do nothing about it. She's so meaningful to so many people, and I would never just let her pass away and just say, you know what, she said no services, so it's no big deal. She means something to me, and I want to have that service. And I think that oftentimes we aren't looking through, our kids' eyes are looking through it with that lens when we're thinking, you know what, just make it easier. I want you guys to get through the grieving and get back to happy. That's great, but there's steps we need to do to get to that process. And sometimes I think that gets truncated a little shorter than it should be.
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
I just want to reiterate that when we say services, we're not always talking about the 2-day visitation the night before, open casket, burial the next day. Services means a wide range of things these days. It could be having a visitation with the body present, but then following by cremation and then burial of the urn. It could be the typical 2-day, or it could be having a full visitation service in 1 day followed by a graveside service. It could be a memorial service or a celebration of life after the cremation has taken place. My best friend lost her mom last year and had her cremated, and then threw the biggest party I've ever seen. I mean, I'm talking DJ, open bar. It's everything her mom, who came from a big Italian family, it's everything she would have wanted. And that's how they honored her legacy and had her cremated, but still gathered with that support system and got to honor the memories that were left by her.
Okay, so, we're gonna go into something else here in a second. Okay, so truth, a visitation and funeral service provide the platform upon which families can experience closure, healthy grief, and receive support. Okay, we're going to talk about prepaying for doing prepaid funeral plans. So, Sarah, you want to start us out on that?
Sure, what's the myth?
We're just going to generally talk about it.
So basically what a pre-arranged funeral service is you determine which funeral home you're comfortable with. A lot of people have family traditions on funeral homes that they've gone to for many years. Some people are shopping around. I think first and foremost, find a funeral home that you're comfortable with, that you think is going to serve your family in a compelling way at the time of need, and that you trust. Once you've determined that that's your place, then I would recommend meeting with a counselor and just kind of beginning to have that conversation on what you would like to have with your services. Oftentimes, some of the really, really big questions can be answered very quickly by you, but would be a huge, question mark for your kids. Even something as easy as burial or cremation. That's one that we see a lot of people struggle with. One that we see a ton of people struggle with is, well, Dad was a veteran, and I think he mentioned one time he wanted to go to Jefferson Barracks. We can do that. And then people don't know, and then there's conversations to be had. Even if we could just get those kind of big question boxes checked in a pre-arrangement conference, it's an enormous help to your family to at least have a record in place of what you were thinking before you passed, because then that can be kind of your voice in the room as your family is coming through making arrangements. We can take that a step further and contractualize that plan. So when we contractualize that plan, we're picking out specific items. You're picking out your casket, you're picking out your urn, you're picking out, what type of services you want to have, and then we convert that to a contract. And with a contract like that, typically depending on the funeral home, but that's what that's going to do is lock in your choices, lock in your wishes, and depending on the functionality of the plan, could also potentially lock in your cost to where at the time of all the hard decisions are made and your family owes no balance.
So, okay, so let's dive into this, the contract.
Yeah.
Okay, what are the benefits of having a contract in place?
I think that there's two main buckets that we're going to achieve with a benefit of a pre-arranged funeral contract. First and foremost is the emotional care of your survivors. You're alleviating them of some really tough choices while they're going through a really tough time. So I think that a lot of times people go to, okay, but is this going to protect my money? And that is important, but I think that the reason why we're doing this is to protect our kids for the most part. I personally believe that our birth belongs to our parents and our death belongs to our children. And so I think that by creating a plan like this, we're providing them a really beautiful gift and taking care of them that one final time when we're not there to take care of them any longer. So that's, I think, the first achievement that we can really do with a prepaid funeral plan. Secondly, we do oftentimes lock in the cost. So, we've had families that have been prearranged for 40 years. And, I can only speak on my, personal where I work, but I know that this is true across the industry, is that when you bring that in, there's often a tremendous savings in cost because you're paying current day prices even if they age over time. So there is definitely a financial component as to why it can be very, very wise to get that taken care of ahead of time. And to your point earlier with the Medicaid spend down too, we can also make that funeral plan irrevocable to where it would not be used as an asset against you in a Medicaid spend down. But I also think just taking care of your family that one final time is a really beautiful gift that you can provide.
Okay, so that was a lot, okay? And so you can lock in the pricing.
It's going to depend on your vendor, like everything.
Okay.
Depending on what funeral home you go to, they're going to have different products that they offer for prearranged funeral service. But many of them, one of the benefits of doing it ahead of time would be a freezing of current date.
All right. We've learned in other seminars that moving to different states can really throw a curveball on things. So, one of the things that I've thought, okay, great, what if I've pre-planned a funeral based on where I live now, but now my life has changed. I've moved to Florida to retire there, and I pass away there. So what can you do with that prepaid plan then?
You lose every penny. I'm just joking. No, I'm just joking. So, you know, like I said, do your research, do your due diligence, find a funeral home that you trust, that you believe is reputable and is going to be around for a really long time. And even if you do that, you can't promise that that funeral home's not going to get hit by a tornado when you need it, or that you're not going to decide to locate out of town. So to that end, in the state of Missouri, any prepaid funeral plan cannot be held by the funeral home, and you don't want it to. You don't want to write a check to that funeral home and have them hold it, because then we have no guarantee that that money would be there at the time of passing. You want it to be held in a product that's going to protect your money. And what that looks like in the state of Missouri is either a trust that is operated, like, so for instance, we used to write products on the St. Charles County Funeral Trust. So that has a board of trustees that's going to look over it and make sure that that funding is being held where it's supposed to be held, or we can fund it through an insurance plan. Because it's held outside of the funeral home, it is transferable. So every penny that you've paid in is 100% protected. If you move to a new funeral home, they're going to take the money in that policy and they're going to apply it to their general price list at that time. So oftentimes if you move, you would lose that price lock promise, because we can't make another funeral home, you know, honor our general price list from many years ago, but you are guaranteed to never lose any of your investment. You can apply it to the services at the time of transfer, and that's something that our team would help your family walk through. And I always offer that, you know, if you guys move, if you decide that to heck with these crazy winters, I'm out of here and going to Boca, that's fine, give me a call and we're going to find a funeral home down there that's going to take really good care of you, and we're going to work on transferring that contract to a qualified provider in wherever you end up.
Okay, so that was one of you answered a question that I had, like, what if the funeral home goes out of business and you've prepaid this, it's actually not paid directly to the funeral home?
Your funding is protected, and as a matter of fact, if you write a prepaid funeral contract in the state of Missouri, every single one of them comes with a $25 fee, and that fee is for every contract to be hand audited by the Missouri Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers to make sure that it is contractually sound. So you also have a lot of confidence in knowing that your contract is very solid and reputable.
Okay. Anything to add on that, anybody? Nope. Okay. One of the things that I did want to mention also is that, you know, the panelists that we have here, we really try to make sure that they all are experts in their field, that they have servant hearts, and I just wanted to say that we don't just have anybody come in and provide information. So everybody, I feel, is great resources for more information. So thank you. Steve, there is no way to age successfully. It's just a downhill decline.
Yes. So, boy, it does feel like that some weeks, doesn't it?
Yep.
Right? You know, let's be honest, right? We're not as, spry as we were at 20 at, wherever we are now. Those things are going to happen. We can't do the same things. That doesn't mean we have to be less active. We might not be able to do the same activities, right? We might not be able to swim a mile anymore, but maybe we still get in the pool and we walk, right? So we do those things to stay active. And so I think it's just about reformatting where we are in life. What can we still do? I mean, my wife's been wanting me to stop playing softball for 20 years. I said I've got one more joint that I haven't blown out yet. I've got a little bit longer. But honestly, it's staying active, finding things to do. We talked about volunteerism before. We talked about people still working, well into their 60s and beyond. My father-in-law, he just turned 80, still runs his own company, still goes into the office every single day, and he'd have to be at home with his wife, so I can see why he's working every day. Anyway, so I'll be here all week, I know. But the point is, finding things to do. If folks that sign up with managed care Medicare programs, oftentimes they have the Silver Sneakers program through the Y, so they can go. There's other benefits that people can tap into. So I would say that while things as they say, like aging is not for the weak at heart, but it is what we make of it and what we do with it. And so if we need to modify our diet, if we need to modify our exercise routine, if we need to make sure that we need to see a certain specialist because we've got more pain and it's limiting what we're doing, then we have to do those things to better ourselves, to have the quality of life that we all deserve.
Okay, so truth, growing older is a part of life. We'll need to modify our diet and activities to match our needs. Okay. Jessica, myth, veterans funeral services will be fully covered because they served our country.
That is not true. Are there any veterans in the room? First and foremost, thank you for your service. So, coming into the funeral industry, this was probably the biggest myth that I've faced, and it breaks my heart every single time because we are then the person who breaks the news that the VA is not going to cover your funeral expenses. The VA is going to give you a plot space at a national cemetery, cover the opening and closing cost at that cemetery, along with providing you a headstone or marker if you're going into a columbarium space there, or a mausoleum space. And so it's often misinterpreted that they're going to cover the disposition as well. And that's where it gets confusing because veterans are often told they're going to cover your burial expenses. And that's true. They're going to cover the act of burial. If you're cremated or if you're having services prior to the burial, they're not going to cover that method of disposition. So you still need to work with a funeral home. There still are going to be costs involved for the cremation to take place, for the funeral services to take place. But if you're going to Jefferson Barracks or another national cemetery, the act of burial is going to be covered by the VA. If you decide to go to a cemetery that is not a national cemetery, the Veterans Administration will give you a headstone or marker at that cemetery. And then if you apply for it, they will provide a $300 burial allowance that goes towards the plot space, the opening and closing, those type of things. But as far as covering everything revolving the death and the burial and the services, they're not going to cover the method of disposition. So it's important to pre-plan or have a life insurance policy, whatever that method may look like to you, to cover those expenses outside of the act of the burial expenses.
Okay, all right. So truth is, veterans are eligible for a space, but everything beyond that is not covered. So you need to look into the details.
I was going to say, can you address the spouse as well, the spouse of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so as a spouse, or even if you have a dependent child who is mentally dependent, they also have the ability to go to a national cemetery as well. So keep that in mind too, that your spouse can go with you. And I learned this recently, that it can be the spouse that so like for example, if you have a veteran who lost their wife, that wife can go. But if he gets remarried and the other wife dies too, she can go too. Whoever is married to the veteran at the time. So I learned that as well, because at first I was like, oh, well, I kind of thought it was under the assumption that it was kind of a one-time thing. But that's not the case. So with that being said, yes, your spouse can go with you, also to a national cemetery with no additional costs for the plot space, the marker, the opening and closing. And then also if there is a mentally dependent child as well, they have the eligibility to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Allison, my doctor will talk to me about hospice when it's time.
Not necessarily. In my experience of working in hospice, our team realizes that, there are some physicians that are more comfortable than others talking about when it's time for hospice care. So my recommendation would be to be the one to initiate the conversation, or sometimes I know that we have families contact our main hospice number and just inquire about it. We normally then instruct them to reach out to their primary care physician and get an order for hospice care for us to be able to do what's known as a hospice consult or an explanation of benefits. We can talk more in depth about our services at that time. But yeah, my recommendation, don't wait for the doctor to bring it up. If you're curious, if you qualify, be the one to initiate that conversation.
Okay, so truth, many doctors wait for the patient to bring up hospice. Families and patients often say they wish they had enrolled in hospice earlier. Okay. Steve, myth. As you age, you aren't interested in or can't understand technology.
No, that's not true. I mean, I think most of us probably are using technology in some capacity, whether it's cell phones, tablets, laptops, your smart TV at home. So I think that it is complicated, right? I mean, I get frustrated with technology. I was about ready to tear my computer off the desk yesterday dealing with some tech stuff. But I think it just depends what people want to do. Some folks don't want to do it because they said, no, there's just too much spam stuff going on there. I don't want to mess with it. Some people might be a little bit like afraid. But I know like Oasis, and there might be some other, I know there's other programs. I'm sure the library does. They offer classes on how to use your smartphone, whether it's an Android or an Apple, and they teach you those things, how to use Google and set up your calendar. So I think it's about what you want to do. Back to my mother-in-law, she doesn't use a smartphone, and I've been trying to encourage her. I said, just use it for texting so we can send you pictures of the grandkids. You don't have to respond. I said, but at least we can send them to you so you can see them right away, because she always complains that we don't print out pictures, and that's true. We don't print out pictures anymore. Everything's digital. So I think that make it what you want. Find the technology that works for you, and worst comes to worst, ask one of your grandkids.
Okay, yep. So, truth, some seniors are cautious of technology, but more and more seniors use Facebook to stay connected to their families. It's one of the ways. So, okay. Sarah, myth. If I own a burial plot, that's all I need.
That's a very good piece of the pie. We definitely need a place to place that casket after services. So a funeral plot's very helpful if you have that prearranged. That's great that you have that final piece of property, but there is quite a bit of services to lead up to putting that casket in that final resting place. So there are many steps of the cleaning process leading up to needing that grave or that niche.
Okay, all right, so truth, it's a great start, but there's many decisions associated with the issue of burial and or cremation, and this creates overwhelm at an already emotional time.
That's right.
Okay.
What if you have a burial plot that you don't need? How do you resell that?
It depends on the cemetery in which that plot is located. Every cemetery is going to have its own rules on like a resale program, so we can talk after this and I can let you know if I have any insights on the cemetery in which you have property.
Great, thank you. Ryan, myth. All I need to is to create a will is to write down my wishes on notebook paper and sign it.
That is a horrible idea. So, the state of Missouri let me back up. Can you do it? Yes, you could do it, and it's easily contestable. The state of Missouri, for a legitimate legal will, requires 2 witnesses, and it notarized your signature. So if you look at your wills, chances are that's what has taken place, and you're in good shape. Don't write down your wishes on a piece of paper and just call it a day, because I said this yesterday, people are nuts, and nothing makes people more nuts than death and money. And so have very specific wishes outlined in your will. Even better, have a trust in place so that you can avoid probate. A will, we didn't touch on this yet, but a will does not keep you out of probate. It will tell who gets the knickknacks in your house and give the directions on how you want to be either buried or cremated. But if there are large assets like a house, like a car, money in a bank account that doesn't have a signor on it, then they're going to have to probate your will. So the only way to keep it, one of the ways to keep it out of probate is to put your assets into a trust. Does that make sense? So a will is a good thing. It's a good roadmap. A properly drafted will is a good roadmap. But I encourage you to take that next step. At a very bare minimum, have either a payable on death on your assets or put them in a trust.
So truth, handwritten wills are easily contested.
They're easily contested.
Okay,
That's correct.
great, okay.
Multiple types of trust though, right?
You can have multiple types of trust, yes. You can have a revocable living trust or an irrevocable living trust. That's a whole nother discussion.
Right, yeah. Okay, great, thank you. And if you have specific questions, Ryan will be sticking around. You can talk to him further about that.
Absolutely.
Allison, hospice means leaving my home for an inpatient facility and giving up my primary care doctor.
That is false. Hospice, we go to wherever our patients are at. So I can speak for my caseload. I have patients that live out in the community in traditional home settings. Maybe someone lives with our kids, or maybe someone is still living independently out in the community. We go to traditional home settings. We go to skilled nursing communities. We go to assisted living, independent living. Basically wherever is home for the patient, that's where hospice services can take place. You do not have to give up your primary care physician. Your primary care physician, if you wish, can continue to follow you while on hospice care as long as they are willing to do so. In my experience, sometimes we see that primary care physicians, some of them prefer to have the hospice medical director follow that patient while they're on hospice because that is a specialist. A hospice medical director, hospice is what they do. They are very skilled in palliative care. So some primary care physicians, again, it goes back to their familiarity with hospice and their comfortability. They may elect to have the hospice medical director follow. But if I know, working with my patients, we always offer, if someone wants their primary care physician to follow them while on hospice, that is your choice to do that as long as your doctor is comfortable with that.
Okay, we're about out of time to quit talking about these myths and truths, so I'm going to run through rapid fire real quick here. So, Allison, all hospice providers are the same, myth or truth?
Myth. Most hospices provide the same core services, which include nursing, social work, chaplain, hospice aide, bereavement coordinator. Some also provide more specialized services, things like pet therapy, massage therapy, music therapy, etc.
Good to know. Steve, staying in my home at all costs proves I'm still independent.
That might be true, but it might not be the best option, just depending on what the situation is. So I think that if you were looking at what your options are, you need to have somebody come in to help you with that. So a social worker or care manager, somebody that can come in and lay out the pros and the cons. What makes most sense? Here's the cost for this. Here's the cost for moving. What are the expenses that you have to now incur? Because maybe you can't mow your lawn anymore. You can't get up on the roof to clean your gutters. So now you have all these other expenses plus all your regular home expenses. So it's about looking at your budget, what makes sense, can it be managed at home? Most people, though, stay in their homes. So you're only talking 15 to 20% of people ever probably live in some type of a nursing home or an assisted living during their life. So that means 80% of people never move into a situation like that they stay at home. So just know that there's options and you just have to analyze them all.
Okay, so we have down true independence is learning of options, deciding what's best, writing a plan, and staying interconnected no matter where you live. Okay. All right, Ryan, my family just knows my wishes in regards to my estate, and so they'll just do what I want after I die with it.
People are nuts. Right? So no, that's definitely not true. Like we've been stating, make sure you have a plan in place, well-defined plan so that your family knows exactly what your wishes are.
And I mean, this is a very emotional time, and I know talking to many people who are involved with this process talk about how if things aren't planned out and in writing, that it can end up literally tearing families apart because of that. So,
Absolutely.
okay. All right. Last thing. Allison, hospice is expensive and my family won't be able to afford it.
Not true. Hospice services are covered under Medicare Part A, so it's part of your Medicare benefit. What is included, it's 100% coverage, and there's no deductible for any of our services for someone who meets the eligibility criteria for hospice. So that includes a whole interdisciplinary team that comes with hospice care. Like I mentioned, nursing, social work, chaplain, hospice aide, music therapy, all of that. Those team visits are included. Any medications that are related to your hospice diagnosis or any medications that a hospice patient should need for comfort are covered, as well as durable medical equipment. So, if someone's receiving services in their home and they need a hospital bed, we provide a hospital bed. If they should need a wheelchair or any other specialized transport chair, we provide that. If someone should need oxygen, incontinence supplies, the list goes on and on.
Okay. So truth, hospice is often available at little or no cost. It's covered under Medicare and many private insurance companies. Okay, awesome. Well, I know we're running a little overtime today, so thank you panelists for your time. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you so much. Real quick, I'm going to tell you our next month's seminar, The Truth About Scams and How to Avoid Them. That'll be Sergeant Melissa Doss with the St. Peter's Police Department and Sarah from the Better Business Bureau. So we're going to be touching on some of the things we talked about here about technology and staying safe. If you, upon leaving, would turn in your orange evaluation form. You can leave it in the box at the back. There's information from everybody here. They'll be sticking around for a few minutes anyway. I know Steve's already stayed longer than I know he said he could, so thank you for that. Questions?
Just have a comment. You being a lawyer, you brought up courts and things like that. It always reminds me of what Ronald Reagan said. Government isn't the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. So the more you can keep the government, the courts or anything else out of it, the better off you are.
Yeah, and attorneys can be the worst. I mean, and if there's conflict amongst the families, the goal is to have just, like we said, a very well-defined plan, have it in writing, leave nothing up to interpretation.
Ms. Silver, did you have a question?
It's not a question, I just had a statement. When my father passed away, his card was TOD to me.
Okay.
I went to sell it, he went to license it, because I had not titled it in my name, it could not be sold. So if you get a car, TOD, immediately title it in your name so you can.
The same thing goes with houses. Do you all know what beneficiary deed is? It's the same type of process. It's a payable upon death that your house will pass on to who you designate outside of the court system. That's important. So if that happens, reach out to a lawyer or a title company and they can title that property in your name so that you're getting the tax bills going forward.
And just to clarify, Ryan was asked here today because he is both an attorney and an owner of a title company, and we've worked together for 15 years. So. Okay, yes, sir, I'm going to run this mic back to you.
I don't think I need a...
Oh, you're good and loud.
The prepaid inserts that you would put with a with a funeral home, say there's $5,000 in there, is that kept out of the funeral home, or is that money put in escrow? How's that handled?
So depending on how you fund that funeral contract, it will either be held in a trust and released to the funeral home at the time of your passing, or it's held in an insurance product and released to the funeral home at the time of your passing.
Well, I'm scared of insurance companies. We have a long-term insurance with Genworth. They went from a AA rated company down to a C rated company. I'm not even sure the money's going to be there if we ever need it. They tell me it is, but I don't trust insurance companies.
That's an interesting point. I mean, and you definitely are right that I guess, like any institution could fail that's holding your money. So I guess that definitely is a valid thing to take into consideration. Definitely, you want to make sure that money you're planning on being at the end of the road is. I can only speak for where I work, like I said, but we use like the industry standard of an insurance company that's like national for funeral products. I would definitely do your research if you're going to write a prearranged funeral plan to ask them what insurance company is your funding held in, and then you can do your own personal research to make sure that you feel comfortable with the company that's going to be holding your funds.
With the mergers of a lot of mortuary services now,
Right.
when they merge,
Yes.
don't they take on liabilities as well as assets? So if you have a plan with one company and they're bought out by another, they automatically have to cover that.
Oh yeah, I would imagine that would be in the understanding if there's a merger, like with your funeral home, like for instance, like Hutch and Steiger, like they.
And buckles.
Exactly. I would imagine, and I would be shocked, which again, I'm not familiar with that merger, but I would imagine that they, by buying that company, they're saying we're going to take on all the pre-arrangements that were written by that funeral home prior to the acquisition.
And that is, and to follow with that, I have a prepaid with Bowie. Is that the same kind of thing that every 5 years I double checking what that?
Absolutely.
What my contract is?
Oh,
My
totally.
Bowie's been bought since.
Right.
I bought mine.
And yours is still good.
Yours is still good, 100%. I just always, and I echo what he says, like I do think taking a look at your plan every few years is a good idea. Your family dynamics change. Sometimes your idea of what you think an appropriate ceremony would be given the circumstances. If you write one when you're 60 and now you're 85, your life might look really different, and the idea that you have for what you want for a ceremony might be really different, and that's okay. So we recommend, that's actually a large part of my job, is families that have already written a contract that is already in place. They come in and I review them, and we make sure that we've, number one, not missed anything. We want to identify any gaps in service to make sure that they're all taken care of, but also make sure that plan still fits what your life looks like now. And adding any documents. So like for instance, if you've added a power of attorney since you wrote that first one, let's get that paperwork scanned into your files so that we can have that updated, and as well as a copy of your DD-214 if you have that.
Going back to what I asked about the revocable trust and irrevocable, what's the big difference in that?
His question is, what's the difference between revocable and irrevocable?
Yeah, I turned off
Trust.
mic, but you probably can hear me. So, 95% of the trusts you see out there are going to be revocable living trusts, and that's a perfect vehicle for keeping your stuff out of probate, right? Like what we keep hammering home is keep the courts out of it. An irrevocable trust is designed to have essentially a third party hold your property. Unless you have trust issues with family, or you've got Jeff Bezos caliber type money, you probably don't need an irrevocable living trust. So if you've got a revocable living trust, that is more than sufficient to handle your needs. Now there are times where I have clients come to me and say, hey, I've got to have a third party handle these assets. I do not want them under my control. All right, those are very unique circumstances. Talk to your attorney about setting that up. But 9 times out of 10, the revocable living trust is more than sufficient. Yes, ma'am.
Brian, did I understand correctly that if you do not have like a will or a trust in place, that all of your assets will go to probate, or
No, that's not necessary. So
it?
let's talk about your average family, right? We've got a house. You could take care of your house with a beneficiary deed. I'll give you What we charge $160 to take care of a beneficiary, and that includes the recording, okay? That takes care of your biggest asset. Then the TOD on cars. If you put a TOD on your car, I think the Department of Revenue charges $15 to get that done, something pretty nominal, right, or minimal. Your bank accounts, they can be taken care of by adding a sign order onto the account, so that if you pass, there's still someone living that can take care of that money. Your retirement plans, your insurance policies, those all have beneficiaries. So, or beneficiaries on it. So there is ways to craft around not having a will or not having a trust. However, you've got stuff in your house, right? So your lamps, your tables, your chairs, who gets that stuff, right? And that's what the will is designed to do. So you can have a will that says, my family's going to split all the knickknacks in the house, and my watch goes to my neighbor because she watched my dog over the years, right? And so if everyone is in agreement and they're reading through the will, and all the stuff gets divided and everyone's happy, you don't have to probate that will. Does that make sense? Yeah? It's a good roadmap. So there's not an end-all. If you have a will, it's going to go to probate. If you don't have a will, the stuff's going to go to probate. It's when you don't take care of the stuff with titles on houses, cars, expensive jewelry that people are arguing over, right? That's when the courts have to get involved. So I encourage, if I haven't said it enough, put your plan in place so that you can keep the courts out of your estate. The government. Yes.
So what, like, for example, we have a will, but we started that in Georgia. We no longer live in Georgia because I'm here. So how do we get that updated while living in Missouri?
So is Missouri probably where you're going to stay for a while? I mean, this is, right now it seems like the logical thing. Like I said earlier, with taking a 5-year look at everything, if there's enough changes in there that you say, you know what, I probably want to give this to so-and-so, and I have a different idea of what my funeral arrangements are going to be, it might be worth calling somebody and just having a whole new will drawn up. Here's some prices. Typically, a run-of-the-mill basic will is going to charge about $500. Okay? If you find an attorney who will update your existing will, it's probably going to be about the same amount of money. So it's probably best to just get a whole new will completed. That way, you don't have to deal with another state. You're drafting a will for the state that you're a resident in, and that's easy for anyone to not contest, and if it needs to be probated, the courts will recognize it, no problems.
Any other questions? Yes. Go ahead.
Recently, my sister was on hospice care, but as a minor, they're coming out of their pockets. And the supplies that were ordered were just out and out. Is there a way in the future to, if we come across that circumstances, to cut back on some of those expenses?
I can only speak from my experience in working. I was just saying, I can only speak from my experience in working for Lutheran Senior Services. I would say most of our patients do have Medicare insurance. We have had a couple have to go through private insurance, and I don't know. I'll be frank. I don't know all the details of that, so I can't really speak to it. I'm sorry that happened though.
It was like all these oxygen tanks and all this stuff started coming in.
Like the hospice ordered too many.
Well, just all this stuff started coming in, and she died within 12 hours.
I'm so sorry.
Poor thing.
She had cancer for 17 years. It was really blessed. But that's, and a 17-year-old daughter watching all of this, it was not fun. Husband's getting all these expensive bills. Why do we call hospice?
I would would recommend, I mean, I don't know how long ago this happened, but you could contact that hospice company directly and ask about it. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I mean,
I would contest that.
yeah, contest, that is the word I'm looking for.
Just doesn't-
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for attending. Great questions. Another round of applause. And again, there's information and handouts over there, and sign up if you want to come to the next seminar or be notified. And thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoyed it.